Good evening and welcome to the Speakeasy Podcast. I am your host, Constance Willard, and tonight I have the experts here with me. I have Patricia Anderson, better known as Lady P, in the house. I have two actor accordingly, Daniel J. Williams, here with us tonight. We have Deborah Ellison here with us tonight, and we also have Siobhan, the relationship strategist. And tonight we're going to talk about boundaries. Why do we need them? And how do we set them? And so I'm just going to start out by saying boundaries are important. But we have to understand that there are some good boundaries and there are some bad boundaries. And so how do we determine if a boundary is good or if the boundary is bad? And so, Lady P, talk to me about the boundaries.
Listen, this is a great topic tonight. For me, it is definitely a process that I'm currently going through. When I thought that I had healthy boundaries set for work and lifestyle balance, I learned in the last month I didn't. So boundaries are important because it reduces stress. It reduces your health being affected. And I know that I spoke to you a couple weeks ago and I told you I passed out at work. Come on now. I'm dehydrated, I'm overworked, and I had to come to the realization because I'm opening up a new hospital and this is what I do, and they cutting my employees' hours, and so it's like I gotta pitch in and do it all. But guess what? If I'm not here today or tomorrow, they will find someone else to do it. So I had to start saying I'm going to take care of myself for self-care, and also to come home and be a happy person, to be filled with joy. But for me, like I said, personally, even though I've worked 7 days a week for the last 3 weeks, I am, trying to do self-care. And that is a boundary that I have to do because I thought I had it all figured out. So I'm here to listen, learn, and execute what I'm being taught today by these experts that are sitting on the stage.
All right. Excited. She to listen, learn, and execute. I like that. Because you know what? When we learn something, we got to execute it. It's one thing to learn, but if we don't execute it, all that knowledge is wasted. So thank you so much, Lady P. Daniel, good evening. How are you?
Great evening, everyone. I'm excellent. All is well. Oh, man, boundaries. I like Lady P's first response on that, because you know what, boundaries are it's not a broad thing. Boundaries are really intricate because you got to have them in all the areas of your life. You got to have them set up in all your areas of your life. But the main reason for boundaries, as far as I'm concerned, is really to safeguard a healthy environment for you to function and operate in. So you keeping everything that's healthy for you to function and operate in for you within your reach, and it doesn't allow access of the unhealthy things to be able to dwell within those same borders. So I think the boundaries are for you keeping things from having access to you, and at the same time it keeps you in access of only the healthy things that you know that are good for you.
I like that. Thank you so much, Dave. I like that. I really do. So Siobhan, talk to me about boundaries.
Ooh, boundaries. They are necessary. But for boundaries, you got to be deliberate about them. Because if you're not deliberate, they can kind of, they can change. Now, I'm not saying that you should never move your boundaries, because depending on the circumstance, you might need to, because oftentimes we set up boundaries after the fact when something happens, and it's like, okay, I want to get real rigid with this boundary, but you can go overboard with it. You know, if you're setting it out of fear, out of like being controlling, things of that nature, then you can go overboard with the boundary. But within boundary, you have to have balance as well, you know. And so that's why I said you got to be real deliberate about it and check on them often. You know, it's okay to go back and say, okay, for this period of time, I needed this right here. I needed to set this up. Is everything okay? Are things flowing? Can I loosen up a little bit? You know, oftentimes when we go from one extreme to the other, well, when we're trying to find a balance, we go from one extreme to the other if we're not careful. And so you can get real rigid. Okay, I'm over here. This is real loose over here. So now I'm going to tighten up right over here. But then when you recognize and you get more information and you want to find that balance, it's okay to go back and just really adjust. So that way, try to get as close to the middle as possible, you know, depending on what the situation is. And maybe we'll talk about some situations a little bit later. But yeah, boundaries are about balance as well. And I'll go ahead and pause.
All right. So, you know, flexibility. Okay. And we think about, you know, when we raise our children, we have one set of boundaries for when they're smaller. You know, don't do this. Don't touch that stove. It's hot. Don't stick your finger in the light bulb. But as they get older, the boundaries have to change. And sometimes they have to be extended. You know, and I think about myself growing up, you know, in my teen years, I think my mother was like, well, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to be running the streets. You're going to be at this house and you're not going to do X, Y, and Z. But then as I got a little bit older, I can be out past 12 o'clock. Okay. But then the stipulations come in. When the boundaries got extended, then came the stipulations. Well, you can stay out to 2, 3 a.m. But when I turn around at 10 till 11 at St. Paul AME Church, I better see you in my path. Okay? And I mean, she would at 10 minutes till, she'd turn around and look at that back door and look at that back. And I had better been somewhere in her line of view, or it was going to be some problems. And boundaries were going to be changed. Okay? And she did that for years. And I was talking to a friend of mine one day. He said, is that why she was always I said, yeah, that's exactly why. She was turning around to see if I was there. And so our boundaries are flexible. Okay? There has to be some elasticity there. You know, we just can't be so stringent all the time. Now, in some cases, you have to be. There's no give and take. Sometimes there has to be some set boundaries. In the workplace, for instance, there has to be boundaries. And they have to be stringent at times. And they have to be stringent. Why? To make sure that we are all on one accord as far as meeting the goals and the objectives of the organization in which we work. So there has to be boundaries. And so if you say that people have to report to work and clock in no later than 7 minutes after the hour, everybody, even us in leadership that don't clock in. But I can't expect people to come to work on time when I'm not showing up on time. Okay? So with boundaries, there has to be some flexibility. There has to be some exceptions sometimes, but there definitely has to be accountability. Has to. Deborah, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening. When I was in my early 20s, I was gifted the most wonderful gift in life by a doctor I was an associate for. And he told me, Deborah, you're getting ready to make more money than you ever made in your life. You're young and you don't know. You got to have some boundaries. And he gifted me a book called Boundaries by John Townsend and Henry McLeod. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And that Christian book was a lifesaver for me because it taught me so many lessons that I did not learn growing up about the purpose of boundaries and where I stood with them. And that no is a full sentence. And it helped me so much. And still today, I refer back to that. I'm at my age now, that was in my 20s. I still refer back to that knowledge and the things I've learned over the years to help me with this walk in life, because you can be taken advantage of.
Okay. Very good. And so when we make boundaries and we set boundaries, we really have to plan them. We just can't just lower the hammer at one time. So, okay, doggone it, boom, it's going to be this. We really need to put some thought into it, and we need to plan them before we execute. Because if we don't put thought into it and we execute, we may have total chaos. We just may. So there has to be some planning and some thought into our boundaries. Now, I know sometimes when you get mad, you're like, okay, well, that's it. That's it. This is how it's going to be. No and, buts, ifs about it. That's it. This is it. But is that the right way to do it all the time? Lady P.
Ooh, listen, there is some course correction. So when it is not the right way, depending on the situation, you got to course correct. So what I heard is from everybody, I heard protection, I heard being intentional, I heard being flexible. And so you have to evaluate that within yourself to say, have I been these things? Am I setting these things? So,